You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome to episode number 70 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. This week I'm excited to be sharing a conversation that I had with Matt E. from the noon Zoom meetings. And although being relatively new to the program, Matt emailed me and offered to be a guest on the podcast after some hesitation. And I wanted to read just a part of his wonderful email. He wrote, I do think I might have something to offer in my own story as a Native American and the reality of intergenerational trauma and the persistent cycles of addiction, abuse, and violence that follows, and how these cycles remain unbroken in a lot of our families in my community, including my own, as well as coming to terms with some of the spiritual destruction and genocide and how that manifested in my disconnect with my own lack of a spiritual connection and prejudices I've had to let go of since working the program. I know it's been powerful in my own recovery seeing Native representation on the outside of this program, and I'm sure it's present inside this program too, of course, and even your podcast. I just want to contribute to that if I can. Yeah, and I thought he would be absolutely perfect for the podcast. After we finished recording, Matt mentioned a reading from the Big Book of AA that helped him in coming to terms with his spirituality and letting go of old prejudices. And this comes from Bill's story on pages 13 and 14. And this is just a page after Bill had mentioned, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice, when he was talking about his friend finding God. And I've read that passage on another episode of the podcast. So turning to page 13, I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the order of things were the essential requirements. Simple but not easy, a price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of Light who presides over us all. Great reading, and in our conversation we did talk about the loss of a spiritual path from Matt's Native American roots. And thinking of that, I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience at the High Lung Ritual in San Francisco this past weekend, and I will definitely have more to say about that at the end of this episode. But yeah, during their opening, they had a few Native American women performing a smudging ceremony. And I'm not sure what nations they were from, but yeah, 3 women and a little girl. It was so adorable. But for some background, smudging or other rites involving the burning of sacred herbs is a ceremony practiced by some indigenous peoples of the Americas. While it bears some resemblance to other ceremonies and rituals involving smoke from other world cultures, notably those that use smoke for spiritual cleansing or blessing, the purposes and particulars of the ceremonies and the substances used can vary widely among tribes, bands, and nations, and even more so among different world cultures. And it smelt to me like they were burning sage, and I also felt a sense of cumin as well in there, so I'm not sure exactly the things that were burning, but it was so beautiful. They were using feathers and branches to cleanse the stage, and I know Kai swept some of the smoke onto us in the audience, and I was pretty close to front row. Anyway, I did want to play a little bit of Highland's opening ceremony at the Warfield, and this is the call and response. And it also had some beautiful nature sounds in the background that played for about an hour before the band actually took the stage. So it was wonderful entering into the Warfield and just hearing these nature sounds.
Remember that we all are brothers. Remember that we all are brothers. All people. All people. And beasts and trees. And beasts and trees. And stone and wind. And stone and wind. We all descend from the one great being. We all descend from the one great being. That was always there. That was always there. Before people lived and named it. Before people lived and named it. Before the first seed sprouted. Before the first seed sprouted.
Oh my God, I am still riding a spiritual high from that performance, and more on that later at the end of this episode. Well, now I am ready to turn it over to my conversation with Matt, and here it is. I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, and I'm so glad that you reached out via email. When I first got the email, I thought it was going to be feedback for me to read on the podcast. It was pretty lengthy. And I'm just like, oh, this sounds awesome. And then what I realized you were pivoting for being a guest on the podcast, I'm just like, oh, hell yeah, this would be awesome.
Yeah, but I tossed and turned in my head for a bit before I made that decision.
Yeah. Well, I'm really grateful that you did. So, yeah, we have Matt here on the podcast, and I know Matt from the Noon groups. And Matt, you are here in the Bay Area, correct?
No, I'm actually I am like 4 hours north, Northern California. Yeah, okay. I'm in sort of the rural mountain area.
Nice. Yeah. You've always mentioned Northern California, and the Bay Area is part of Northern California, but I forget that there's places outside. I know we have meetings up in Redding and Ukiah and places way up and out there. So, really glad that you found our meetings.
Oh, dude, me too. Yeah, the Noon Zoom is the best. Yeah.
You've been kind of with the meetings for less than a year, couple months.
Oh yeah, I've been coming up in like 4 months in the program now. Really, when I got into the Noon Zoom, that's like when my program really took a turn for the better. Nice. That was like a couple months ago. I think a little over 2 months ago.
Yeah. So you've listened to a bunch of podcast episodes. And so, yeah, you know that I usually go through what's in our inner, middle, and outer circle as kind of a way to get to know each other. And are you comfortable with sharing that here on the podcast?
Absolutely. And I'll just say real quick, this is like a very surreal moment, like listening so much and being here. Yeah. So my inner circle is pretty vague on the surface level. It's pornography, masturbation, and engaging with sex workers online. That includes escort sites, stuff like that. And as far as pornography, that includes, of course, just viewing it, collecting it, piracy of pornography, just sort of general engagement with it. Masturbation, abstinence from that being in my inner circle, that's right now I'm currently committing to a 60 to 90 day abstinence, sort of as just like a reset, as like a lot of people are familiar with in the program. And then, pretty self-explanatory, the engaging with sex workers online, escorts, that type of deal.
Yeah, I know for the masturbation for me, I first started working with a sponsor after I had been in the program for a year and a half. So I think I had already done that sort of abstinence But when I started working with the sponsor, he asked me to abstain from all sex completely. And by that time, a year and a half in the program, my wife and I were trying to reestablish our sexuality. And so that was out, but I did commit to 60 days of no masturbation. And I've mentioned it here on the podcast that I think I made it out to 84 days. Just, kept going one day at a time. There were a few days in there where I felt kind of sketchy. It's just like, I'm ready to masturbate. No, I can't do it today. I'll do it tomorrow. And by then, when I got to tomorrow, the urge had gone away. So it was something that really helped me trick myself.
For sure.
Yeah. How about your other circles?
Yeah. So my middle circle is like pretty long. Got a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of non-sexual things I've added over my like progress in the program. Big trigger for me is lack of sleep deprivation. So I'm staying up late. And then there's things that coincide with my inner circle, stuff like overeating, social media addiction, the big thing for me, as well as like compulsive spending, sort of just patterns of like avoidism, like escapism, I should say. And then, and then in middle circle, that's where I include stuff like specifically seeking out sexual content, watching like sexual TV shows, stuff that's inappropriate, excessive TV show watching, and that's kind of like the surface level of it. I mean, I could go through a lot of them, but
yeah, not necessary to add every single thing, but just a brief glimpse.
Oh, I will say also like isolation is huge. Skipping meetings, skipping my daily calls with the fellowship and stuff like that.
How about outer circle?
Yeah, my outer circle is pretty long too. But some big ones for me is music, whether it's listening, creating, writing, recording. It's a big outer circle for me, as well as reading. I read a lot. Like I love authors like Kurt Vonnegut, as well as just like a lot of self-help stuff, and writing, like writing, journaling was a huge exercise, even if it's just like getting on a walk or weightlifting too. And listening to podcasts like this one, it's got a huge list. I always tap into those. And then just some more general outer circle, like step work, meetings, stuff that's going to help my program, meditation, and all that stuff.
All sounds really good.
Yeah, I'm trying to develop it more because there's more I left out, and I was like, dude, this is such a long, like, I'm good. I'm set. I got outer circle for days. And then when I start getting abstinent and all of a sudden these hours, 4 to 5 hours of not watching porn are just free and open, all of a sudden that outer circle does start shrinking a bit when you, when it's like, so I am still trying to like develop that, add more to it.
Yeah. In your email, one of the concerns you had was that you had just joined the groups, so relatively new, and didn't have a lot of long-term abstinence, and you were kind of worried about coming here as a guest on the podcast with not a whole lot of sobriety. And for me, any sex addict story is valid. And so I think, by the way, I live next to a Harley dealership, so occasionally I get some loud vehicles coming across. But anyway, you had mentioned the fact that talking about being relatively new to the program and not having a lot of abstinence, at least from my perspective, it's an important thing that we share with the podcast community. So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, man. And like I had mentioned before, I was a bit nervous. I think I was listening to a podcast. I believe it was the one with Matt from Arizona. And listening to him and just talking about like kind of the vulnerability, embodying that vulnerability and setting aside just like all the fear and the fears of like anonymity, stuff like that. And just like that. And then like forming the connection in that. Because I like I said, man, I've listened to so much of this podcast through my own journey in SAA, and listening back on this couple step ones in the podcast, like, were huge for me. Just like, and it was just so admirable, the vulnerability that they were taking, and then talking about these things, sharing our stories and our experiences, like dismantling the shame and so much of the stigma around sex addiction and everything that embodies it. And then I just got the crazy idea. I was like, yo, what if I reached out? What if I did that? And at first it was kind of just like an intrusive thought. And I was like, oh, no, I ain't, hell no, I ain't doing that. And then I don't know, man. I kept listening. And a week later I don't know. I was like, hey, I'm just going to do it, you know? And I was afraid because I'm a newcomer. I haven't had a lot of abstinence. I haven't had over a month of abstinence yet. I really consider myself relatively naive, kind of still green for like pun not intended. But I figured, hey, that's a perspective to offer too. You know?
Yeah. Completely valid. Yeah, we've had, I can't remember, I think it was David H. I'm not sure, someone that was in the meetings for about a week. And I had put out an invitation to be part of a panel, and he jumped right in. And so, yeah, I'm just starting out in this program. And so, yeah, any level of amount of time we've been in the program, and I mean, where we are in our sobriety, I don't care, as long as we're sharing our stories with the podcast community, with the world. I think it's an important thing. It also, you know, like you mentioned, talking about this kind of stuff helps break the stigma of sex addiction, and that, you know, we are just, you know, regular people.
Yeah.
Before getting into your family of origin stuff, I am blanking. So yeah, why not pivot to that? You had mentioned being Native American and some generational trauma, and I was really, really intrigued by that in your email. And before getting to that, I think what I did want to mention was, have you been to a BIPOC meeting?
You know, I just attended my first one today.
Okay.
Not in our fellowship though. I go to another fellowship that's like centered around Buddhism and stuff. And I saw a BIPOC meeting, and immediately I was like, why not? I've been hesitant to join those meetings because I am biracial, and I'm pretty light skinned. Like I had a brother mention before, it was like, oh, I would not have guessed you're a Native until I heard your step one. And I get that a lot. But if it's crazy, if you look at a family picture, like I am the lightest skinned one. Like my mom everybody's around me is dark. And a lot of times I've been to like butted jokes of that by like family members and stuff. It's just like, that's kind of been my hesitation. And I just attended my first one today, and it was huge. Like awesome. Even just some of the introductions was amazing. Just like, even just introducing where you're calling from. And then it's like, at least the meeting I attended, as you introduce where you're calling from, you don't just say, I'm from Kentucky, this place, this city. You say, I'm from this territory of these, and then you naming the tribal people.
Yeah.
And just like otherwise known as insert city name, Kentucky, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, whoa, what the hell? Like that's, dude, just especially as a Native, like that's so amazing. But yeah, I just, that's cool. It's cool that you mentioned it. I just checked my first one out.
Yeah. There's one that started, I think it started here in the Bay Area, but it's a Zoom meeting. It's a Saturday morning meeting. I think it's at 10 o'clock, but it is specifically a BIPOC meeting that a lot of my friends do go to, and talking about the Native American culture, generational trauma, and the degradation of spirituality, you know, or things that you had mentioned in your email. And I was wondering if we could talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So like a bit of background about myself. So I'm 24 now, and I first discovered porn when I was like 9. And I grew up in a really turbulent household, and that's where a lot of the discussion around intergenerational trauma becomes relevant for me and for a lot of people. Because I mean, originally this addiction was an escape from a lot of the pain and a lot of the damage and trauma that was in my household. You know, when I first started coming to the meetings and started saying I am a sex addict and going through the process of my step one, I like really thinking, like, I just realized like how long I didn't consider myself a sex addict at all. And my addiction runs through my family. Like it's rampantly. Whether that's substance addiction, food addiction, shopping addiction, it manifests in a lot of different ways. And like me and my siblings, I mean, I grew up in a house of like 13 to 14 people.
Oh,
I have,
wow.
I have 8 siblings. We all have our different manifestations of this. And when I look back on my family tree, a lot of these cycles continue all the way up there. And I believe it's like remnants of genocide and a lot of repression. And this concept of intergenerational trauma, this reality, is not exclusive just to Native Americans. I mean, it's apparent in a lot of people. I mean, just going to these meetings and hearing just the patterns of sexual abuse, of sexual trauma, or even not even such extreme examples. It's not exclusive. But
yeah, we hear a lot about adult children of alcoholics. ACA is something that is very common. And so a lot of us have had different levels of addictive personalities in our family of origin. So it doesn't necessarily need to be sex addict to sex addict, but different types of substances. And like you mentioned, your siblings all kind of displaying different types of ways that they cope. I think we started mentioning it earlier, the core hurts and behaviors, those things are kind of the same in what we each do. And this is case in point with some of my best friends that I've grown up with have been alcoholics and drug addicts, and we all speak the same core language. So we understand the root of it, and how we choose to cope is completely different, but the things that are underneath the surface are the same.
yeah, absolutely, man. And coming into this program was huge in me recognizing that and realizing that, just like, as far as all that pain that, I've like buried, that pain doesn't go away. That trauma, the turmoil, it's it's there. And and I think that's huge, especially going back to like how it's passed down. But that was a huge thing coming into this program. Like, dude, I really came to this program because I wanted to stop acting out. I wanted to stop watching porn because it was so destructive. And through the process of getting into this program, that's ripped the Band-Aid off and showed me like, oh yeah, this is so much more than the surface level of my addiction, my vices, and what that has manifested as.
Yeah. So with what you had mentioned in the email, and I had brought this up a little bit earlier, was spirituality and the sense of spirituality loss that you've had. And I didn't fully understand everything that you were conveying in the email, and was really, really curious about that.
Yeah. So like at a certain point, like growing up, it was really a bit confusing spiritually because we grew up very traditional, a lot of rituals that were passed down through my ancestors and through our lineage and within our tribe. But at the same time, we had at a certain point, I might have mentioned my mom struggled with alcoholism. At a certain point, there was in her own healing journey, she became sober and she actually became saved and became a devout Christian. And then that kind of introduced this whole new aspect to spirituality and religion into my life. A lot of it was a lot of shame, like prone to being used for a lot of shaming, especially related to us. And it was just what I would attribute to a bit of like a misunderstanding that kind of manifested in ways of just like using the Bible and her interpretations as justification for abuse, specifically physical abuse, stuff like that. And then just general sort of you're going to hell, like stuff for like minuscule things. But it was also really confusing because sometimes she did have relapses in the drinking, but meanwhile I was still hearing a lot of this stuff, me and my siblings, and so it's so confusing. And then came in another aspect where there was a total disregard and a shunning of that original traditional spiritual practices that we had. And that kind of tapered off here and there, but I mean, it's still stuck around for years now, and that kind of paints a bigger picture to what I've learned more these past 2 years as I've like learned about my lineage and gone through therapy and had things point out and brought out of me as far as just the whole reality of intergenerational trauma and sort of the genocide and colonialism of that is my tribe, as my people, we don't really have a Bible. We don't have a lot of stuff that was able to be passed down besides like word of mouth, besides tradition and a lot of rituals like that. And so as a people, we've lost a lot of sense of spirituality. And I could say that as far as my family. I mean, I can't speak for a lot of other tribes. I can't speak for other indigenous people. So I've had to come to terms with that. And there was, when I first started, and I knew a lot of this stuff as a kid. I mean, growing up, we were educated and we were brought up by my parents and my family about the reality of things as far as what happened to my ancestors and my grandfathers. And, as I started learning about a lot of this and really understanding how this plays into my own picture and my family system. And I grew into like a really sharp like pessimism and cynicism against religion, especially organized religion, Christianity and such. I could probably say for religion in general and spirituality, I hated it. And I think about like when I was a kid and a lot of the stuff I went through and a lot of just like the self-pity I felt. I hated God, whatever God was, whatever this creator was in my life that gave me whatever it gave me. I hated it, whatever that concept might be. It took me a while to sort of let go of that cynicism and all that negativity and that hatred that was like just being redirected out of me. And that was a bit before the program. I will say probably I definitely don't condone it. It's not for everybody, but psychedelics has played a huge part in my sense of spirituality and sort of cracking that mold mentally in a lot of like my really kind of toxic patterns. I don't know, around the age 18, 19, I had some pretty big experiences that really cracked that open and really showed me how much of that hate and like negativity I was harboring and how like closed-minded I really was. And eventually I reached the standpoint where, as far as my beliefs, I tend to believe that it's pretty clear, like every religion, to me at least, to all these different religions, these pathways, people are connecting with the God of their understanding. They're connecting with some higher power, like as is referenced in the program. And that was like undeniable for me to see when I kind of like set my prejudices aside. But coming into the program, it's been confusing. I'm on step 2 right now, so I'm sort of figuring it out for myself. But I eventually ended up leading into a lot of more Eastern stuff like Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. Nothing specific as far as like sex and lineages, just sort of like tiptoeing around those, and then coming back into connection with my own sense of spirituality and being able to carry these new traditions and these rituals and these ideas and the views, especially when it comes to like spirits and the world and the higher power being like the life and the universe around me. That's it. That's a huge source for me. But yeah, that's been a bit of my own like journey with that so far. And,
that's amazing. We don't need to delve into it too deeply, but I was curious when you brought up psychedelics, if it was like anything like ayahuasca or DMT, mushrooms. I know people have done specific therapies around that sort of stuff. I have no experience with that, but one of my good friends has just done some mushroom therapy with his therapist, and it has been an eye-opening experience for him. So I'm curious about what that was like for you.
Yeah, man, dude, like, I'm so happy to talk about it too, because it's, I think it's so cool, especially recently, like a lot of the stigma around that is being broken. And so much. And now we're getting the research that it's like, but of course it's not for everybody. But for me, I've dealt with a lot of suicidal ideation and thoughts here and there throughout my life since I was a kid. And psychedelics have saved my life on multiple occasions. Now, and here's where a lot of the issues can come in. A lot through these experiences, I definitely wasn't getting the most out of it because there wasn't a lot of integration. And that meaning I would have huge epiphanies. I would have a lot of healing, but a lot of times I would drop it then and there. For an example, I mean, it was as far as like my sex addiction, it surfaced almost every time I've had these experiences and these psychedelic journeys. That was always part of it. I mean, I would learn all this much, but at the end of the light, there would always be, there was the fact that like, I got to stop this. There's just some way, somehow I got to do this. A lot of times I tended to drop that. And I certainly was not doing it in a proper medical setting as far as like with the therapist on hand. I would love to, like, absolutely. And I look forward to, if it may be the day when I am able to do that. I do live in California. We are getting some progress made in that, going that direction. But yeah, I will say something that was crazy is not too long ago, I think probably about a month ago, because as I was going into the program and I recognized that my step one, as far as the lack of integration with these huge experiences, I actually got the offer on a whim to go on a bit of a psychedelic retreat with my two best friends. To go and do LSD. I haven't done ayahuasca. I have done DMT in the past, but and so yeah, I was like, totally, dude. I never get this. I never get this opportunity. I'll take it. And a week leading into it, I was preparing. I was eating right, meditating, journaling, sort of setting the intentions, which is so crucial. I lacked a lot of that in the past.
Yeah.
And I remember there was a certain point where I was sitting at work and I was writing in my journal and I was thinking, like, do I really want to do this? Like, I'm kind of scared. It's been a while, and I was like, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't do this. And then the very next thing, like a couple minutes later, I got a call from my brother in the fellowship, and he called me and he just like poured out his own experiences. And like, he had just had a psychedelic trip the other night before. And I was just like, I kind of talking through him. I kind of just was just like gushing. And I was like, oh man, like, it's so cool. I'm so glad he shared this with me, because he heard me reference it in a meeting before. And then I got off the call and I was like, dude, what are the chances of that? Like, that's so crazy. Like, immediate, that to me, that's some like higher power at work, like some serious synchronicity. And then, and I kind of used that, and I was like, wow, I'm going to go ahead and interpret that as a sign that I should probably follow through with this. And I did, and it was huge. It was massive. It really, really showed me a lot, especially like being in this program and recognizing so much stuff in my life and my addiction. It really broke up in the mold, especially as far as my idea of a higher power and like spiritually. I'm not there yet at all. But I mean, yeah, it's been really profound in my life, and I look forward to, as in the future, as I'm able to incorporate it more.
Nice. Yeah, I don't think I've really talked about it on the podcast here before, so thank you for bringing that up. One of my friends, she runs a recovery podcast and has had a number of guests talking about ayahuasca in particular. And she and her husband have been in recovery for a long time for drugs and alcohol, and so trying to thread the line of what's going to be safe for me has been an interesting thing. But like you mentioned, it does work for some people. It may not work for others. And I think for myself, I am curious about it, but I think I'm just too chicken shit. I've never really experienced any sort of drugs more than marijuana. So not sure if I'm ready to go there, but I have been talking with a couple of my friends that have done mushroom therapy and things like that. It sounds really, really intriguing.
Yeah, man. And and that's totally fine too, as far as that point. Like, it really is. It's not for everybody. And it's like everybody has different paths and different sort of callings, I believe, in life. And and that's like totally okay. Yeah, for sure.
So back to sex addiction, and something that you had mentioned earlier was around porn and porn piracy. What are you talking about with porn piracy?
Dude,
this is interesting.
Yeah, it's always kind of like a complex thing to bring up in meetings, especially when it's like real quick. Like, and it's like my inner circle includes pornography piracy. Like, it's such a weird word, like, combination to even try to say. But yeah, man, at a certain point, like as my addiction evolved and grew stronger and stronger, I've kind of delved into these different avenues. At a certain point, probably when I was like 21, and I really started I got my first job and I started making money. Yeah, I got into piracy, and what that involves is a lot of like file hosting, illegal file hosting, illegal uploading. If people are not familiar with it, there's different like platforms. I'm trying to think of how this without going into too much detail.
Yeah, file sharing type of things, or
yeah, and so I first discovered it because I found like it was insatiable. There were certain niche things, there were certain things I couldn't get my hands on just on the regular surface level websites unless I wanted to dish out money. And then I've been a tech kid for like years. That was my main escape when I was a kid, was the home computer. I'm really familiar with piracy and up to this point. And I was like, oh, I never made that connection. This is like the logical route to go. And I eventually discovered a site, and this site was a private site, meaning that it was invite only. And they usually do that because when it's illegal, you know, and just try to keep it pretty closed off. I kind of squeezed my way in there, and eventually it just grew out of control. And I was just like, I fell into that pattern of just downloading and hoarding, just like collecting. And it was like more content that I would ever be able to watch. And yeah, that really made a spike in my addiction. That's where like really the hours would fly by, you know, day would turn to night. And I was stuck inside staring at my computer screen, collecting all of this. Eventually, I realized, snooping around, that there's even more exclusive sites. But in order to get access, again, these are private peer-to-peer networks and servers. And in order to get access to these sites, you would have to sort of prove your worthiness in a sense.
Yeah.
And as an uploader. And I was like, well, that's weird. I guess I'll learn how to do that, because I want to get to that site. Eventually, I got into that. And what that meant is I was buying subscriptions to sites, and I was going through and running code. Sometimes it wasn't that complex, but I was going through and I was ripping the content to these sites and uploading them for all these people to download. And eventually I did that until I gained access to this site. But by the time I gained access to this site, which is like the most exclusive one, the most private one, I didn't stop. That was like my whole purpose of even beginning to do it in the first place. And I realized at that point, it was addicting. I didn't realize then, but I realized at that point in hindsight, it became a whole new high in itself. Because the reality was, it's like I was uploading a lot of this content, and there was hundreds and thousands of people downloading these and like thanking me, like praising me, like, oh man, this is so much work. I appreciate you so much. And it gave me a sense of validation, like as embarrassed as I might be to say it. There was also this like sense of I was actually doing something productive with my life. I mean, and especially around porn, like kind of making that transference. It was nuts, man. And probably a year went on just doing that until like eventually I was hundreds of dollars in debt. I was like, I think at a certain point I pulled out a consolidation loan, and I had to pay some credit cards off, and immediately I dumped it straight back into paying to fuel this whole new avenue of uploading all of this. And I eventually got like some accolades as far as like the site and the representation in that site and the community there, into like getting as a top uploader, but at the expense of so much damage in my life. It really came to the point of like, this is compulsive. Like I remember waking up, and the first thing I would do is get on the computer and start that process of uploading. And I remember I would look at my phone, I would look at the clock, and I realized, oh shit, like 4 hours passed by. Like I need to get something to eat. I'm dehydrated. I'm like, my body aches from how long I've been sitting in this chair. I'm like, and then just immediately it's like, all right, just one more upload and then I'll get off. And then the next thing I knew, day was to night, and the hours had went by, and I was also just totally isolating. And like even going to the idea of going to a grocery store was terrifying to me. And the thing is, this community I was engaging with, this wasn't exclusive to me. This was like so common. for all these other people who were on this site. And it was just sort of, some people share, as they shared, it was just a reality they accepted. Like, oh, this is going to be my life from here on out. Like, it's worth it. It's worth what I'm getting from the pornography. It's worth what I'm getting from this, from acting out. That probably led me to one of my biggest lows, is this uploading to the site, and this just whole new avenue of high I was deriving from this. And God knows, I could tell you once, I even got a letter threatening me with legal action, and I was terrified. They linked my account that I was pirating with to my real name, my real address, all my information. And I remember telling myself, I will never do this shit again. I will never do this shit again. And I fell right back into it. I think maybe a day or two went by, and I was right back in. That pattern's fallen into like all the times before, where these extreme moments in my addiction, and I've totally disregarded it and fell back into it, And there was probably in July or February earlier this year, I really hit an all-time low, where I was just spending hours in this. Like I had mentioned, I pulled out a consolidation loan to pay off all these cards, directly went back in. I was lying to family members about like, hey, can you please help me out? Like, I need money for rent. Like, I don't need money for groceries. I don't have anything to eat. And I would rationalize that by being like, well, that's the truth. I don't have money to eat and stuff, or I have all this debt that I'm paying, but I wasn't telling them, oh, this is all because I can't stop spending money on this pornography. And that was a huge thing to come to grips with, coming into the program and sitting down with the sponsor. He was the one that revealed that to me. He was kind of like, you're kind of BSing right now. Like, you may think that just because it's pornography and it's just you're not, all these other people are involved, and you might not even realize it. And there's more to that, different avenues than that. But yeah, man. And there's also the reality of like, I was damaging, I'll just say from my own perspective, I'm not anti-porn. I'm not anti-sex workers. But the reality is it wasn't just like these big corporations surrounded in that industry I was affecting, but I really was affecting some of these people's livelihoods by uploading this. And I mean, there's probably thousands and thousands of dollars of damage in that process. And that's another thing. At first I was like, yeah, I guess so. But over time, I've really realized that's a reality. And there's also the reality that I was playing a part in continuing a lot of people's addictions, like sort of distributing this material.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that kind of led me to when I first got into the program, probably in February. Like I said, it became like really unstoppable. And I mentioned earlier, I've dealt with a lot of suicidal thoughts here and there growing up, and that's sort of, as I was like in extreme isolation, my brain was so dysfunctional from all of that. That sense of suicide that started creeping up on me, and I felt like it was going to catch me. And that was probably a big turning point for me when I started coming into the program, coming into what the trajectory of that. But yeah, that's a bit long-winded.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It reminded me of a couple of things. Number one was, and this is just minor, when we started first using peer-to-peer software for downloading music, realized that we could download movies, and then I finally realized you can download porn, and I got into a lot of illegal stuff via that. But we got busted for distribution of movies. So the Lord of the Rings Two Towers had just come out, and Star Wars Episode 2 had just come out. So this is right when I got into program back in 2002. And I remember downloading this stuff, and instead of taking it out of my share folder, I just left it in there. And so people were uploading from me. And I got a similar note from the company saying, linking our IP address and everything. and how scary that was for me and my wife. And then, we did what we could and went back to downloading more music and stuff. But the other aspect of it, before I got into program, my wife and I were building a porn website. As I had a vast collection of online porn, and we were designing something, and instead of launching, I kept searching for more and more stuff, and kept downloading more, and never end up actually launching the website. We had logos, we had all this sort of stuff, and it just never went anywhere because I was just so consumed with downloading more and more and more, and just how crazy making that was. And I'm grateful now that we never finished that. But yeah, there was a lot of crazy making there. So
Yeah, dude. I mean, I myself, I lost track at a certain point. I've definitely uploaded more than a few terabytes of data.
oh
And
geez,
I used to have like the drives. And that's the funny thing now is like I have all this, now that I'm practicing abstinence and recovery, I have all these drives with these terabytes on terabytes of data. Like they're empty. Like
mm-hmm.
they have a bunch of music on it and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, man. I also I have ADHD too. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had gone to therapy for about a year and a half now, and God bless my therapist. She's amazing. She's helped me out so much. But my point being, I got prescribed Adderall after a certain point for
Mm-hmm.
my ADHD, and I didn't know that Adderall can boost a lot of like. For some people, it can kind of deter sexual drive. But for some people, it could really take that up a notch. And that was the
Mm-hmm.
case for me, especially around that time when I started uploading. I started getting into that process. It was very, like I said, it was really like productivity. I felt like I was really getting a sense of like accomplishment from this.
Mm-hmm.
And I went nuts with it, man. And yeah, that was huge.
Yeah. A couple of things I wanted to touch on. One was, going back to Native American culture, and wondering if you are watching any TV shows or things around Native American culture. My wife and I have been into a couple of different shows, and I'm so grateful
Oh yeah.
that the representation is there, and it's no longer the Indian chief with the feathers and stuff, that they're telling real stories and real culture. Reservation Dogs
Oh
is
yeah.
an amazing show.
I knew
And
it immediately when you said
yeah,
it. Reservation Dogs, dude, amazing.
yeah, yeah. What's so interesting about it is it really keys us outsiders into the family culture and the multi generations, that hearing about the aunties and stuff. I watched that. I watched Rutherford Falls, Dark Winds, um,
Yeah.
and a lot of this. They've got the writers, they've got the directors, that they're sharing their stories instead of having a writer's room that has no idea what they're talking about. And so it's been an eye-opening experience over the past couple of years, getting to hear those stories and the representation. And I was, just curious if you had any experience watching those shows as well. And it sounds like you do.
Dude, yeah, if you can't see my face right now, I got a fast smile on my face. Like I'm so excited you brought that up. Yeah, dude, I remember as a kid, I mean there was a few movies here and there like Smoke Signals, like
Mm-hmm.
we had those on DVD and we would play those over and over again, but man, Reservation Dogs in particular, I really God, I love that show so much.
Makes me cry. Some
Dude,
episode. Yeah.
every single episode. I swear, I'm such a like crybaby,
Yeah.
and I watch it with my family, and just like it's so beautiful. We cry together, and it's like, but yeah, dude, it's so powerful and meaningful to get that representation of like
Mm-hmm.
the family dynamic, like the everything, the language, the slang. It's like to a T with those writers in the room, and
Mm-hmm.
but I also just that show encapsulates like intergenerational trauma so much as
Yeah.
far as like, especially with this new season, and as it like it's diving into the the ideas with the deaths and suicide, and go to sort of how showing how the patterns can repeat. And but yeah, but I absolutely love that show. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, my wife and I were just talking about that. We've got I think tonight. Yeah, there should be a new episode out. So looking forward to that. But yeah, last week's with the psychedelic trip was something completely out of left field that I didn't see coming. But yeah, just I have been really digging that. Have you seen Rutherford Falls?
I haven't.
Okay, that one's on I think it's on Peacock, and I'm kind of bummed that it didn't get renewed for a third season, but a lot of
I know what
the
you're
same
talking about.
actors. Yeah, a lot of the same actors are on that as well. But yeah, that's another really funny show. A couple of years ago, I'm a huge fan of the HBO show Westworld, and they did an entire episode in Lakota where there was, I think, very minimal English spoken, and it was just this beautiful story. And it's Zahn McLaren, who's the police guy in Reservation Dogs. He was the main character in that, and him telling this love story and speaking nothing but Lakota. It was just, whoa. It's amazing that you can have an entire hour without any English, and we're reading subtitles and just being drawn into that story. So I'm really grateful that some writers are being represented now in the writers' rooms, and directors and actors as well.
Yeah, it's huge, man. I've had a couple moments where it's like it's kind of weird because I mean, the reality is there is people who are like very rarely come into contact with somebody who's indigenous, who's native. I work at a healthcare facility, and so there's a lot of travelers. I've talked to somebody before, and they're like, "Wow, you're like one of the first native people I've met," and I was like, just the idea of that is so fucking bizarre,
Yeah.
so like
Yeah.
otherworldly to me.
Yeah.
But it's so amazing because a lot of the representation I know growing up was like a lot of it was independent, a lot of indie stuff, stuff you could find on YouTube, and to see it on like a huge platform like Hulu, like HBO, all these different avenues, and it's amazing. It's so wholesome to see.
And I think the last thing I wanted to mention was you talked about, an outer circle around music, and with my relation to music and recovery, and was wondering if you had anything specific that you wanted to share or talk about in terms of that, or how you relate to music.
Yeah, man. I'm a very sensitive person. I'm very and like I mentioned, I have ADHD, and for the longest time I've held a lot of shame in that, and I felt like I wish I wasn't. In the past couple of years, I've come to terms with understanding how much that sensitivity and the ADHD, and how much that's a blessing, how that's like really kind of tapped me into a lot of creativity, as it does for a lot of people. So many of the like most creative people hold these traits of this sensitivity of this or being diagnosed with ADHD. And so music's been a huge outlet for me since I was a kid. I mean, even just like starting out, just messing around, making beats on laptops with like a bootleg version of FL Studio, and like getting my first guitar and realizing like, oh, I cannot play this thing for the life of me, and throwing it away for a couple of years and picking it back up. But yeah, man, that's been a huge avenue, like creativity for me. And it's kind of sad because, at a certain point, as I got lost in my addiction, and a lot of my outlets, especially creativity with music, that got severed. I kind of like lost the motivation and interest, and a lot of that I kind of pinpoint to a lack of vulnerability. Like I was just trying to numb and trying to get rid of that sensitivity. And what's been cool is like getting into recovery, I've rediscovered this like passion for music and this drive, and just like, it's kind of weird for me to say, but other people kind of relate to this is like, music's a huge outlet for me to connect with my higher power, especially like when I'm in the midst of recording a song, and just like when I really connect, and when I don't know how to put it into words precisely, but there's just connection with some that I feel is like a connection with God, a connection with something like a whole, something bigger than me. Not to say that it sounds that good, because it probably doesn't. But you know, that is real though. That's a genuine feeling I get. Yeah, I'm a multi-instrumentalist. Play guitar, bass, drums, piano. Throughout my life, that's been like one huge outlet for me to sort of be able to express myself. Like a lot of people, I have trouble communicating a lot of the emotions, a lot of the thoughts in my head, these feelings. But with music, it's like I really feel like that's one of the biggest ways I am able to get some stuff off my chest and to sort of express some of the pain I carry, as well as some of the joy, some of the like love I got. And but sometimes it's not that deep. Sometimes I just want to pick up a guitar and strum around because I'm bored.
Yeah.
But yeah, man.
Yeah, and a lot of times I'll grab my guitar while I'm watching TV and just kind of mess around. But other times when I put the headphones on and start playing, and I just get lost in it, and just really feel what I'm playing. It's just like, oh, this is awesome. This is something that I've been needing for a while, and picking up and connecting in that way is just an amazing thing. And one of the things I'm really enjoying right now, my 13-year-old, he's been playing cello for a number of years, and started picking up one of my guitars and transferring his finger ability into playing guitar. From cello to guitar is a little bit different, but he's learning Metallica songs and stuff, and it's like, oh, this is super cool. And I'm getting to give him some pointers here and there, and whether or not he takes it, that's kind of up to him. But being able to connect through music, the two of us are really bonding, and I'm getting to take him to a concert in a couple months, and that should be a really fun thing. One of our friends, his son plays drums in a death metal band, and me and my friends and our kids got to go hang out, multi-families, so my generation and then our kids, we all got to go to the show and connect with each other through music, and it was such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's sweet. That's awesome.
So we are wrapping up. We've been recording for about an hour here. Did you have anything else that you wanted to cover here before we close it out?
There was something. Oh, add another point to the music thing. Yeah, another point to the music thing is, part of like what my sort of pathway, the trajectory that got me in an SAA is there was an album by Kendrick Lamar, and he just released recently, where he had talked about his own sex addiction, and embodied so much vulnerability in doing that. And dude, I can't tell you how many times I listened to that album, and there's like one song in particular, like there's a couple of amazing cuts on that album, like there's a track Count Me Out, Father Time, a lot of those. There's a song called Mother I Sober that's, I swear to God, like whenever I'm feeling down in my program, I listen to that song, and it never fails to make me cry. And that album was so huge in my trajectory into this program, and just like, especially that song really encompasses like so much of sort of what I was alluding to earlier about effects of generational trauma and the manifestations in that, and specifically in sex addiction and sexual trauma and abuse. And man, that was huge. And that's just a testament to like how powerful music can be, man, and like the differences it can make. And yeah, I actually saw him not too long ago. I took my little brother to a concert. Speaking of like that, it's a huge outer circle for me is concerts. I'm like obsessed. I'm addicted to concerts. No, but like, yeah, it is phenomenal. It is phenomenal.
Yeah, I listened to that album. It's been a while since I've listened to it, but there's some intense shit on there,
dude. Totally. And there was something else I wanted to add, Jason. Earlier, to the point of me saying some of the difficulty in admitting I was a sex addict, kind of that being reduced to just being addicted to porn. I also identify with a lot of like intimacy avoidance and or sexual anorexia, and there was also a lot of difficulty coming into the program because the truth is I've never had sex. I'm a virgin, and I remember when I said that when I presented my step 1 and 2 our noon group meeting, and I had never told anybody that, even my therapist. Never told a single word. It's funny. I was joking with a brother on the phone. It's like, imagine that. Like how weird. That's so weird to not tell anybody for years and years, that being a secret, and then suddenly telling 100 people in some Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, man. There's a lot of shame in it. A lot of like, I kind of a belief held that I'm less of a man because of that, and even just saying I'm a sex addict. It's like, it was tough at first to come to terms, but realizing that like, that doesn't define me, and that is part of why I'm here, is to process some of that intimacy avoidance, and just to realize when I was able to share that in our group, I remember more than a few brothers supporting me and saying, like, oh, you're not alone. I came into the program in the same situation as you. So much of your story resonated with me. And I also wanted to like bring that up on the podcast, and hopefully somebody listening, somebody else who's in a similar situation, you're not alone.
Yeah, definitely. This program is often described as an intimacy disorder, and whether it's the intimacy avoidance or the various ways that we cope, but it's that intimacy that is a fearful thing for quite a few of us. So yeah, I know that you are not alone. So I'm really grateful that you voiced that here on the podcast. And like you mentioned, sharing that with 100 other people on a Zoom meeting, and now you're sharing it with the world here on the podcast. So it's an amazing thing that you're doing.
Yeah, man. It comes back to that point in the beginning. It's like, hopefully when we're able to communicate, discuss these things, it dismantles the shame and the stigma,
Yeah.
And that's powerful, man. That's good. That's what we need.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I am so grateful that you reached out and wanted to share your story here. And I'm grateful for this time because, we've gotten to hang out and fellowship and stuff after the meeting, but, it's never been a one-on-one for this long. And, I feel like I know you a lot more than I did before. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, thanks, brother. And I appreciate all that you do. I've told you before in fellowship, man, this podcast is huge. I can only imagine how much work goes on behind it. And just to say, I really appreciate you and all that you do.
Yeah, thanks so much. All right. And I will be looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at the noon meeting.
For sure. Have a good night, man. I'll see you tomorrow.
Right. See ya. I had such a wonderful time talking with Matt. We ended up chatting for about another 45 minutes after the recording. During our conversation, Matt mentioned the music of Kendrick Lamar, and I'll be playing a clip of that and also sharing my experience from High Lungs Ritual and their amazing ending song called Hammerer Hippier. But before getting to that, I did want to talk about the TV shows that Matt and I were talking about. First, really quickly, I wanted to touch on Rutherford Falls, which is the show that I mentioned that's on Peacock. And this is coming from the Wikipedia page. The series is a comedy about two lifelong friends, Nathan Rutherford, played by Ed Helms, and Reagan Wells, played by Jana Schmieding, and Jana is also on Reservation Dogs. Anyway, their relationship is tested when a crisis hits their fictional small town. After the mayor decides to move a statue of Nathan's ancestor, the town founder, because drivers keep hitting it, Nathan begins a quest to keep the statue in its place. Reagan has to juggle her loyalty to her friend and to her people, the fictional Minneshanka Nation. She wants to develop a cultural center to highlight their history, and Rutherford's ancestor has become known for attacks on her people in the colonial era. So yeah, this is a really, really funny show, and it features a lot of Indigenous people. And if you're looking for a good time, there are 2 seasons of that on Peacock. The other show that we talked in depth about, Reservation Dogs, is a show that was created by Sterling Harjo and Taika Waititi. And Taika has been really doing a lot lately. Like many of his shows and movies, they're culturally relevant, very funny, but also with a sense of heart. Again, coming from the Wikipedia page, the series follows the lives of 4 Indigenous teenagers in rural Oklahoma as they spend their days committing crime and fighting it. After the death of their friend Daniel 1 year prior to the events of the series, the gang wrestles with the desire to move to California, the way Daniel dreamed of. But first, they need to tie up loose ends in their lives and community and make preparations to leave. And so, yeah, it is a comedy, but there is a lot about family, about relationships. Their friend Daniel did commit suicide, so we had mentioned that in our conversation. And there are lots of other struggles that the people of this town go through. I did want to play a little clip of one of the main characters, Bear. He runs into his spirit guide. And at this point, he's still called the Unknown Warrior, but his name is actually Spirit. And this does have some offensive language here, but it's a really funny scene, yet it cuts to the heart of it, what a spirit guide needs to help Bear with.
Aho! Young warrior. Looks as though you've tasted the white man's lead.
It's only paintballs.
I've had many brothers and sisters meet the same fate in my time.
Are you Crazy Horse or sitting?
No. I'm not one of those awesome guys. No, I'm more of your unknown warrior. Yeah. You know my name? William Knifeman. I was at the Battle of Little Bighorn. That's right. I didn't kill anybody, but I fought bravely. Well, I didn't actually fight. I actually didn't even get into the fight itself. But I came over that hill real rugged like, I saw Custer like that. That yellow hair, he was sitting there. Son of the morning star, that guy right there. Fuck, I really hated him. So I went after him, but then the damn horse hit a gopher hole, fucking rolled over and squashed me. I died there. This horse actually, little shit. And now I'm meant to travel the spirit world, find lost souls like you. The spirit world, it's cold. My nipples are always hard. I'm always hungry.
Got it.
Being a warrior, it's not always easy. You and your thuggy-ass friends, what are you doing for your people? It's easy to be bad. It's hard to be a warrior with dignity. Remember that. In my time, we gave everything. We died for our people. We died for our land. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna fight for? I'm just fucking with you. But for real though, listen to what I said. Marinate on that. Oh. Let's go. Ha! Fuck.
It's played by Dallas Goldtooth. It just cracks me up. I found this show on Hulu. There are 2 seasons, and I know a 3rd season is on its way. I think the end of the 2nd season should be this week as I'm recording this. I also thought about playing a clip of one of the characters, Willie Jack, going to visit Daniel's mom who's in prison. And Daniel's mom, Hochti, helps Willie Jack pray to the spirits. And this is one of those scenes that I talked about that brings just tears to my eyes. This episode came right before going to see Hailung. So talking about the spirit of the ancestors and then seeing the opening ceremony with the smudging and Native American women coming out, really, it gave me goosebumps, and it was emotional, both watching the show and being at Hailung's ritual. Anyway, I really, really love this show, and you can tell that Matt does too. Anyway, I did want to continue talking about the song that Matt talked about by Kendrick Lamar. That whole album is really, really intense, and listening to the song, I was trying to find a spot that I could take a sample from, and it was really, really hard choice. At the beginning, it's very low and slow, but consistent. Many lines in there. And then he gets really, really passionate and frantic. And as I'm recording this, I'm not sure exactly which clip I'm going to play here, but such an amazing song. And this also features Beth Gibbons, who is the singer from Portishead. Yeah, and the song is called Mother I Sober. YouTube edit. This album is absolutely amazing. Some of it I found a little bit triggering and intense, but yeah, really, really great. So grateful that Matt had mentioned that here during our recording. Wow, and going on to Heilung's ritual in San Francisco, I really, really don't know where to start. It was such an amazing performance and experience. I did get to hang with someone from the Noon groups, as well as my friend Bennett, who was on episode 50 of the podcast, and we had talked about the excitement of getting to see Heilung, and that we recorded that last summer. And so, yeah, it was so intense. At the beginning of the day, I got to meet with some people that I met through Facebook for a lunch, a pre-ritual gathering, and we got to basically hang out and talk with, just people that I've never met before, but we automatically knew each other. One of the women that was in the group was in AA, and we started discussing recovery, and I actually mentioned this podcast and the program that I'm in, and it was such an amazing conversation. But yeah, we got to hang out throughout the rest of the evening. Before getting to the actual ritual, we also met afterwards, after the ritual was over, at the same place, and got to hang out for a little bit longer. And I had the incredible fortune to meet one of the drummers from Heilung, as well as one of the Hari warriors. And just hanging out with them and having a conversation was just the topper on the evening. So yeah, incredibly grateful for that. But yeah, back to the experience. Yeah, I played the opening ceremony, which fed right into the song In My John. In My John, which I played a lot on episode 50 of the podcast when talking with Bennett. And yeah, Bennett didn't get to meet up with us for lunch, but she ended up getting there just a few minutes before they took the stage. And I was fortunate to get there early enough that I was about 6 feet away from Maria Franz's microphone. Such an awesome spot, and Bennett actually found her way to the front and got to hang with us. But yeah, I did want to talk about the song Hammer Hippier, and they close out all of their performances with this. And during the song, the Native American women got to join them back up on stage. And this song is absolutely intense. And as Maria puts it,
it's being a turbulent journey that is supposed to leave you relieved in the end, because it can be super intense to listen to. But when you come out on the other side, it's like this catharsis process where you're like, okay, all tension, and then relief, and then you feel better.
The song has a driving pulse throughout the entire song. It's over 10 minutes of intense drumming and lights and people all over the stage, just moving and dancing. The entire crowd got whipped up into a frenzy. The very beginning, it's the repetitive part is just hammer hip hip hip, hammer hip hip hip. YouTube edit. It's very hypnotic and trance-like. I actually got into a mosh pit there. The last couple of songs got everyone moving so much. A pit actually started, and it was just incredible. The next section, which goes on for quite a while, is Hangedira Mingya, and that just repeats. And all of this is using the throat singing. It finally opens up to the vocal performance of multiple singers. The words here, and I'll read the translation, like bone sprain, so blood sprain, so joint sprain, bone to bone, blood to blood, limb to limb, as if they were mended. During the performance, there's a part of it where the Hari warriors crowd surf over the crowd in the front, and I got to hold up 3 or 4 of them as they were passing overhead. Everyone on stage starts dancing in a circle, and this is where the Native American women came out and where the crowd just got whipped into a frenzy, and I was part of that. And after a few minutes of just pulse-pounding beats, the voices from the rest of the vocalists comes back in and repeats the same chant as before from the Merseburg charm, blood to blood, bone to bone, etc. And the voices finally give way as the beat drops away, and we're just left with Christopher doing his throat singing. And something that I didn't add here, Kai adds, really long and stretched out, Alu is Urki, which roughly translates to may it be of help. And oh my god, such catharsis after 11 to 12 minutes of this incredible drumming and intense music. Once it ends, I felt the negative vibrations and just the release of emotions, and it was such a fantastic evening. I also did want to clarify that this is my own experience. I meant to say that at the beginning of the episode, but when I talk about the music that is touching me in a spiritual way, this is just my own experience. And I'm open to sharing all sorts of different experiences with different types of religions or non-religious pathways towards spirituality. Always happy to share it here on the podcast. One of the things I did also want to mention, the guy that organized the pre and post gatherings after the ritual, he wrote on Facebook something absolutely beautiful, and I wanted to read this. All of us bound through music, history, and ritual. I had never thought that it could be possible to top last year's ritual at Red Rocks, but for me, tonight went so far beyond anything I've ever experienced in my lifetime. A perfect example of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. The barrier between performers and spectators seemed almost completely broken down, as it was meant to be. All became participants. The energy was electric, both on the stage and off. I completely agree. And some of the people that we were hanging out with actually got to hang out a little bit more backstage than we did. And they got to hang out with the rest of the band and the warriors and all the singers and everything. The blue-haired warrior, Nadia, she mentioned to my friend that the San Francisco crowd was by far the most energetic crowd, and the entire crew absolutely loved feeding off of that energy. And I was just so grateful to be part of that. Like I mentioned, I'm still riding the high of that performance. Wow, I included so much in this episode. And as always, I'll be leaving links to these in the show notes, whether it's the Heilung performances or the Kendrick Lamar song and the clips from Reservation Dogs as well. If you do want to provide feedback for the podcast to be read here, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And if you want to be a guest on the podcast like Matt here, you can email me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com, and I'd be happy to get you into the schedule. I am not sure if I'm going to be doing an episode next week. I may be taking the week off for some time down. But yeah, I really look forward to sharing another episode. I'm really grateful that you tuned into this one. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.